What's up, kings and queens? It's your boy Dan from Daft Previews, and I'm here once again for a comprehensive NBA player prop preview. If this is your first time watching, what I do in these videos is I share my screen, I take you through all the key players, we talk about their matchup, we go through their form lines, I'll tell you what I like, I'll tell you what I don't, and I do all this to give you all the information that you need to make the best bets possible. Now, we had an okay day.
Breaking news. Daft Preview smashes the books, recording over 11 units profit.
So we had an absolute banger. We cleaned up today, hoping to do it again. Let's go. So we're starting things off with the Charlotte Hornets versus the Washington Wizards. Now, for the Hornets, Trey Mann is a game time decision in this one, and no notable changes to either team. We'll start with my man, Kyle Kuzma. Well, he's not really my man. I honestly dislike him, but we have had a good read on him in recent times. So, firstly, his points props 22.5 in this one. He's obviously covered in 4 of his last 5, 7 out of his last 10 games. Matchup with the Wizards is not difficult for anyone, but there are definitely easier matchups. Sorry, against the Hornets. It's not a difficult matchup, but there are definitely some easier ones out there. But Kuzma has covered in 7 out of his last 10. He has covered in 3 out of his last 6 against the Hornets. So he's had some excellent games and he's had some pretty shocking ones. So on that read alone, I'd be a little bit hesitant, but his recent form is excellent. Looking at his assist prop, 3.5. He's got a good matchup here, covering in 5 out of his last 10. Had 10 assists the last time he versed the Hornets, but he has only covered in 3 out of his last 6. Into his rebound prop, the line's at 7.5. He's covered in 3 of 6 games against the Hornets. And, wrong one. And he's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. So just looking at his head-to-head form, it looks like he's had excellent games in his PRA and shit games in his PRA. I think a lot of the trend lines are exactly the same. He's either excellent everywhere or he's bad at everything. So, yeah, so check that out. Every game, so in all these games, he went over his points, rebounds, and his assist prop. And the games he went under in all of them. So that's a very interesting thing to find. So you might even risk it and just play Kyle Kuzma over his points, over his rebounds, over his assists as a parlay, perhaps. That's quite interesting. Other Wizards players, we've got Tyus Jones. Points prop here is 10.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Against the Hornets, he's covered in 2 out of his last 3. Most notably, last 2 games, both of them this season, scoring 16 and 13 points. Somewhat inconsistent form leading into this. And looking at his assist prop, 6 out of his last 10 games. The matchup isn't bad, but he's definitely had better ones there. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, has gone under in 3 straight, and he's gone under in 3 consecutive games against the Hornets. So, look, Tyus Jones at 9.5, I think that's too high. I know he's had some great runs, but I'm going to take note of that, and I'll research that a little bit later on. But at 9.5, definitely be leaning on the under here. What else have we got? Denny Advia. Points prop is at 15.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10 games. Has a great matchup here against the Hornets. But against the Hornets, he's only covered in 1 out of his last 7. So that's not too convincing. Looking at his assists, 4 out of his last 10 games. Covering 2 of his last 7 against the Hornets. And his rebounds, his line is at 8.5. 5 out of his last 10. Good matchup, but only 2 out of his last 7. So very inconsistent form for these Wizards. And if you're losing every single game, it's probably hard to put consistent performances together. So someone's going to go off here, but you don't have all the markets here. Jordan Poole markets aren't available, obviously, because he's coming off the bench. He could go off in this game. Corey Kispert could potentially go off in this game. Who knows? Koulibaly perhaps, but he doesn't get too much action. So, yeah, a little bit difficult, these Wizards players. We'll jump over to the Charlotte Hornets and see what's cracking over there. We'll have a look at Brandon Miller first. Now, he is on the road. He doesn't normally play very well on the road, but let's see what's happening. Line's at 20.5. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10. The matchup is not a difficult one for him, but in 3 career games against the Wizards, he's gone under in all 3. His assist props at 2.5. He's covered that in 5 of his last 10, 1 of his last 3 against the Wizards. And his rebound prop, 4.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10, 3 straight, and he's covered in 1 of 3 games against the Wizards. So he has a good matchup all over the park, or court, sorry, not the park, but very well. Brandon Miller, if you look at his 3-point prop, the Wizards allow the 14th least 3-pointers made to small forwards. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10, and only one of his last 3 games against the Wizards. All right, let's take a look at Nick Richards in this one. He should have a somewhat easy matchup. I think Bagley might be out, so Rashawn Holmes probably starting. But let's have a look at this. Points prop, 12.5. He's only covered in 4 out of his last 10. Scored 15 points the last time against the Wizards. He did that at only 18 minutes. If you look at his last 10 games, he's playing about 27 minutes. So the opportunity is definitely going to be there. Without looking at the lines, I would have suggested maybe his rebound prop is best, but he's hit this in 3 out of his last 10 games and only 1 of 5 games against the Wizards. So even though the matchup is good, I'd be a bit hesitant because the matchup is good for the Wizards, but it's even better the other way around. So these two teams are the worst at defending bigs in this competition, but they're versing each other. And the reason why they give up so much is because their bigs aren't too great. So you got Nick Richards against probably Rashawn Holmes, I'd say, unless they go small ball and Kyle Kuzma starts at center. Who knows? But yeah, so that's a pretty tricky one to read, given they're both soft inside. Miles Bridges. Now, this is the type of game where I think he could really go over. His points prop is 21.5. He's covered in only 2 out of his last 10 games. Head-to-head matches against the Wizards, only played them once. He scored 33 points in that game. So, but looking into his last 10, he's playing the minutes, which is good. He's just shooting so bad. 43% from the field, averaging 17 shot attempts per game. So he's up against the Wizards, the worst defensive team in the competition. So he should get some easier looks. I'd probably lean to the over here for Miles Bridges, but I'm not absolutely loving it. Looking at his rebound prop, he's covered in 7 out of his last 10. The matchup isn't the best, but it's not the worst either. And he had 10 rebounds against the Washington Wizards last time. So, yeah, I'd probably lean to the points or rebounds there of Miles Bridges in the over. But I think my favorite play that I've seen so far is probably the under in Tyus Jones assists, 9.5. I think that's a little bit too high. Given the matchup is an easy one, but both of these teams suck, right? So I don't expect it to be as easy as you would predict it to be. Jumping into the next game, it's the New Orleans Pelicans versus the Philadelphia 76ers. So Tyrese Maxey is out of this game still, which means the old man Kyle Lowry is going to get a lot of run, a lot of minutes. I'm looking at this Philadelphia team and I wonder where they're going to get their offense from. Buddy Hield's not playing great. Tobias Harris is inconsistent as hell. Kyle Lowry can probably score 10 points, but outside of that, I think they're in a bit of trouble here. The line's at 8.5 for the Pelicans. But let's go through these 76ers first, and then we'll get to the Pels. Starting with Tobias Harris. His points prop is 20.5. Difficult matchup here against the Pels. He's covered in 3 of his last 10. He's gone under in 3 consecutive games against them. His assist prop, 3.5. Covered in 4 of his last 10. And gone under in all 3 against the Pels. And his rebound prop, 6.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. And he's gone under in 3 consecutive games against the Pelicans. So I say this every time I preview Tobias Harris, but I say I'm not going to be betting on him, but I'm probably going to break that rule because I am going to bet on him, but I'm not going to bet the over. I'm looking at betting an under in this one, and I'm thinking of just taking his under in PRA perhaps. That's at 30.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10. He does have a difficult matchup, and he's gone under this against the Pels every single time. But the other under I was considering is taking the under in his first quarter points. So the under for his first quarter points has cashed in 9 of his last 10 games. And in all 3 games against the Pelicans, he's gone under. So slow start from Tobias Harris is what I'm looking for. I'm thinking of playing this one because if he goes over his first quarter points, I have a feeling he'll just keep pumping throughout that. It'll be one of those games where he starts crushing it. So that's what I'm a little bit worried about. But Tobias Harris, not a big fan of you, bruh. Might play the under. Kyle Lowry, let's have a look. I did have a bet on Kyle Lowry last time he played, but then he was pulled out late. So his last 3 games, they're the main ones that really matter to me. So the matchup's a difficult one. He's covered in 2 out of his last 3. 15, 8, and 14. Lines at 10.5. You're looking at assists, 5.5 assists. He's covered in 2 out of his last 3. 10, 7, and 5. And then his rebound props, 3.5 at plus money. 6, 4, and 2. But he does have a difficult matchup for all 3 of those props. If you look at his 3-pointers made, if you look at over 1.5, it's minus 190. If you look at over 2.5, it's plus 140. You can take him for 2, but then that would be a push. He's covered in 2 out of his last 3. He's playing a lot of minutes. And look at his attempts, 6, 5, and 7. He's shooting 35%, so you probably need slight uplift in his attempts. But if I had to play Kyle Lowry, it would probably be the 3-pointers made prop. And Buddy Hield, 15.5. I know he's been struggling to hit this. Check that out. 8 consecutive games now. He's gone under that line of 15.5. Matchup isn't difficult, but it's not easy. 2 out of his last 10, he's gone over. Looking at his assist prop, it's still at 3.5. It's been 3.5 for quite some time. He's covered in 8 of his last 10. This game against Memphis, I'm pretty sure he got those 3 assists in the first quarter. So his line stayed at 3.5 for a very long time, despite hitting these numbers, and that's because he barely hits them. He does have a good matchup when it comes to assists, but what I'd be interested in seeing is first quarter assists, because when I check the box scores, it looks like he gets a lot early. Okay, he is capable of getting them early, but I was right. Against Memphis, he had 3 assists in the first quarter. I didn't get one for the rest of the game. So Buddy Hield has a good matchup for assists. First quarter one, I probably won't take, but the over 3.5 at minus 119, it might be able to feature in a parlay perhaps. I wouldn't take it as a single because the odds aren't high enough. But I know there's a lot of people out there who like those types of odds anyway, because it's all about whether they hit or not. It doesn't matter about the profit. So you might see that in a lot of slips, but I'll probably pay that as a parlay because that's not enough for me to bet as a single. Looking at these New Orleans Pelicans, though, we'll start with CJ McCollum. Points prop, 16.5. The matchup here against Philly, somewhat difficult. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10 games. He's covered in 3 consecutive games against Philly. Looking at his assist prop, 3.5, 5 out of his last 10, and in all 3 games against Philly. And looking at his rebounds, 4 out of his last 10, and he's gone under in 3 straight against Philly. If you're interested in his 3-point prop, the line's at 2.5. Difficult matchup, but he has covered in 8 of his last 10 games. Head-to-head matchups, he's covered in all 3 games against Philly. So, I don't know. CJ McCollum, 3-point props. What are we thinking here? The last 2 games the Pelicans have played have been blowouts, so he's played less minutes, 25 and 22 minutes. Still getting his attempts up, though. Check that out. Despite these games being blowouts, he's still taking between 7 to 10 3-pointers per game. So, to get him 2.5, mate, that could even make a same-game parlay because the odds aren't the best. Could be a same game if we take Buddy assists and CJ McCollum. We'll see. I'll look into that a little bit more later. Brandon Ingram. I did bet on this guy not too long ago, and it burnt me. Looking at his points prop, 20.5. Scored 12 points against the Raptors. I took his over in that one. Got murdered. In his head-to-head, only scored 15 points in his last matchup against Philly. Looking at his assist prop, 5.5. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10. He does have a good matchup here, and he had 6 assists the last time they played Philly. So, these 2 games, Indiana-Toronto blowout, so he played slightly less minutes. Line at 8.5. There's a risk that a blowout could occur again, to be honest, but 5.5 is minus 140. It might be something I take Ingram for 5 assists, perhaps. Have that as part of the same game parlay, but let's see. Rebound prop, 5.5 as well. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. Tough matchup, and he's gone under the last time he played the 76ers. Herb Jones, he's had some pretty big games, and I know that because when I lose my bet on Ingram, it's because this guy scored a lot more points than expected. Points line for him is at 20.5. He has covered this in 8 of his last 10 games. It's pretty impressive. Looking at the matchup, probably more on the difficult side of things, but it's not a hard one. He has gone under his last 2 games against Philly, though. In those games, averaging 7.5 attempts per game. In his last 10, he is averaging only 8 shots per game. Shooting quite efficiently at the moment, and if he can continue that hot form, chances are he goes over. But, man, to have his line 10.5 on 8 shot attempts, he doesn't make 2 3-pointers a game. So, I think he has to shoot close to 50% in order to cover this, but I don't hate Herb Jones in this one. Could take him for 10 points as part of the parlay, but this thing's going to be huge by the looks of it. Let's check his 3-point prop, actually. His 3-point prop is 1.5. He is a good shooter, but can be quite streaky. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. Hasn't hit a 3-pointer against Philly. Philly allowed the 7th fewest 3-pointers made to small forwards and the 6th fewest 3-pointers made overall. So I'm not sure if Herb Jones is going to get the same type of opportunities. 2 games he's gone under here against the Indiana Pacers. They allow the fewest 3-pointers in the league, I believe. Miami, Washington. So that's quite interesting too. So in that Washington game, he only attempted 2, and against Miami, he only got to attempt 1. Now, 76ers, not a bad team defending the 3-point line, so I'd probably be a bit hesitant. I do lean to the over, don't get me wrong, but I think there are better plays out there. Zion Williamson, we'll check his points and assists because his rebound props are shocking. 5 out of his last 10 games, he's covered this points line of 21.5. He's covered it in 3 consecutive games against Philly. He's scoring. Assist prop, 5.5. He's covered that in 6 of his last 10, and 2 out of his last 3 against Philly. Screw it. Let's check his rebound prop because we might even bet the under. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10, so he does hit it quite well. He's got a good matchup, and he's hit it in 2 consecutive games against Philly. He's just wildly inconsistent, so you'd have to have a very good read on Zion in order to pick that. So the last one there is Jonas Valanciunas. Points prop here is 11.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. Matchup is a great one against Philly, and against Philly, he's covered this in 2 consecutive games. In those games, playing close to 30 minutes. These days, playing 21.9 minutes per game. So I'd be a bit hesitant to take Jonas. Rebound-wise, his line's at 9.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games and covered in 1 of 3 against Philly. So, yeah, I'm not really feeling Jonas in that one, but a couple of plays for me to really look into there. So, obviously, I've got the Tobias Harris unders I'll look to consider. Buddy Hield assists, CJ McCollum 3-pointers, and Brandon Ingram assists. Very similar to what I did yesterday. If I feel good about it, I'm just going to bet it. I'm not going to overthink it. Let's just get this shit over and done with. I'll put a lot of bets down. I don't care. If it feels right, we're doing it. If I don't win, I don't win. Such is life, eh? Let's jump into the next one. It's the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. All right, before we get into these players, I just want to give a shout out to Anthony Edwards. I know you are not watching and you will never see this, but my God, what a get from Anthony Edwards today. That block at the end, I've probably seen it 15 to 20 times. Game on the line, hits his head on the rim. Absolutely wild. So to start this off, we're going to kick it off with Anthony Edwards. My God, that was a great play. All right. So both of these teams, firstly, very good defensively. So most of the matchups are going to be difficult. If it's not, then I'll call something else out. But looking at his points prop, the line's at 30.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. Against the Cavs, he's gone under his points prop in his last 2 games. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 4.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. He did have 7 assists the last time he played the Cavs, 1 assist prior to that. Looking at his 3-point prop, that line's at 2.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10 games. And he had 3 3-pointers made against Cleveland last time. And looking at his rebound prop, 5.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. And he's covered his rebound prop in both games against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I personally won't be playing anything on Anthony Edwards, but I hope he puts up some absolutely arousing highlights for us tomorrow. Rudy Gobert, his points prop, 15.5 in this one. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. He's gone under in his last 2 games against Cleveland. Checking out his rebound prop, 14.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10 games. The matchup actually isn't too difficult here, but he's gone under in 2 consecutive games against the Cavaliers. I think what's interesting is to check his rebound prop without Karl Anthony Towns, who's their second best rebounder. We can see in Rudy's last 10 games without Cat, he's covered in 4 out of his last 10. So no dramatic increases there. The other Minnesota Timberwolves players I wouldn't say are worth looking at right now. Darius Garland, let's check him out. So his points props at 22.5. He's covered in 2 out of his last 10. Donovan Mitchell not in this game, so I think it's a smarter decision to see how he goes without D-Mitch. Evan Mobley either. So a lot of the scoring comes down to Darius Garland, but since Mobley and Mitchell have been out, we can see that Garland hasn't necessarily produced more when it comes to scoring. His minutes are there, shot attempts are there, but his shot percentage is quite poor. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 7.5. He's covered in only 3 of his last 10. Again, a lot of these games are without Mitchell, the more recent ones, and he hasn't been able to cover. Head-to-head matchups against the Timberwolves, he's gone under in both. Looking at his 3-point prop, his line's at 3.5. That hasn't moved. It's been that way for quite some time. The shot attempts are definitely there, but his percentage is down. He did make 10 3-pointers in one game against the Timberwolves, but that was in 2022. 1 3-pointer in their last matchup. So I personally would probably just look at an under for his points and assists, given the difficulty of the matchup and the fact that I think his lines are elevated, given that there's no Mitchell and Mobley. So you can see this season covered this 30.5 points and assist line in 9 of 38 games. In his last 20 games, he's covered it twice, and his last 10, he's covered it once. The game he covered was against Detroit, and the game prior to that was against the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics weak at defending point guards. The Pistons extremely weak at defending point guards, but just weak overall. Up against this Timberwolves team, who are great at defending point guards and pretty good at defending everybody. I'd probably lean to the under here. There was one game where he scored 51 points and 6 assists, but that was back in 22, so almost 2 years ago now. If you like unders, I'd be leaning the under in Darius Garland's points plus assists, because I just feel like the matchup is too difficult and he hasn't been playing that well despite the increased opportunities. So could be I'm not going to say it's going to be a blowout here. Cleveland are actually favorites in this game, -1.5, believe it or not. I don't see how those odds are calculated if you're missing Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell, but I guess Minnesota are on a back-to-back. But yeah, Garland, I'd probably think about fading him. Jared Allen, let's have a look here. Points prop, 17.5. He's covered this in 3 consecutive games, 7 out of his last 10. Playing a lot of minutes. Shot attempts are decent. Last game against the Timberwolves, he scored 19 points. Checking out his rebounds prop, that's at 11.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. I had 8 rebounds last time against Minnesota. Want to check his rebounds without Evan Mobley. All right. So his rebound prop, he's covered in 7 of his last 10 games without Evan Mobley. Does have a difficult matchup today, but if he's not getting rebounds, who's going to get him? George Niang? Dean Wade? I doubt it. I think big responsibility for Jared Allen to get some boards in this game. And if the line's at 1.5 and the sportsbook thinks are going to be close, there could be a lot of rebound opportunities here. So Jared Allen rebounds, one to look for. I just want to check his points without Evan Mobley. Okay, 5 out of his last 10. What if we add Donovan Mitchell to that? So he's covered in 3 consecutive games without both of them, and he went under the 2 prior to that. So I think the line's just about right, 17.5 there for Jared Allen. But points plus rebounds, that could be an option. But I'll put that down on my short list, and I'll have a look into him. All right, so given that the Cavs are so depleted, Isaac Okoro, he could be an option. Has had some pretty solid games as of late. Check that out. Points prop, 12.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 5, 6 out of his last 10. Really benefiting without Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley by the looks of it. 5 games without them, he's covered in 3 of 5 games. Does have a difficult matchup here if Anthony Edwards does pick him up. So I don't hate it, to be honest. 12.5 for Isaac Okoro. Like, they've got to get points somewhere. They're still going to get possession. They're still going to get chances. I don't mind that. But from this particular game, probably Anthony Edwards, nothing I'm loving in that one. Jared Allen overs and Garland unders is probably what I'm thinking at the moment, but I'll dive in a little bit deeper after I get this video done for you guys. Next game's the Orlando Magic versus New York Knicks. Wendell Carter Jr. is a game-time decision, and Jalen Brunson is a game-time decision as well. So we'll start with Jalen Brunson. I wonder how long he's been off. His last game was on the 4th of March, so he's only missed 4 or 5 days. So his points prop, 28.5. The Magic, another good defensive team. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10 games, and he scored 33 points the last time these guys played, and New York lost that game by 18 points. So 1 out of his last 4, but has covered in the last matchup against Orlando. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 6.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, only 1 of his last 4 against the Orlando Magic. They don't allow very much assist to point guards at all. His 3-point props at 2.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10. Did have 5 3-pointers in that last game against Orlando, but Orlando don't give up a lot of 3-pointers either. But Jalen Brunson, he's good enough to be the exception to the rule. I'd probably lean to the over in his points if I had to bet it, but the good thing is you don't have to bet anything, right? We've got the freedom of choice here. You make your own decisions, and when you win your bet, it's because you made it, and when you lose your bet, it's because you made that decision. Remember that. Next one, let's have a look at Precious Achiuwa. So we don't have any props for any of the Knicks backcourt or wings, just the bigs at the moment. So his line's at 9.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. Difficult matchup against Orlando. Did score 23 points the last time these guys played, though. Looking at his rebound prop, 6.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10. Had 14 rebounds in that last game against the Magic. So that's interesting. Presses Achua to make 1 3-pointers plus money, but he's made 1 in 4 of his last 10. So let's check out Isaiah Hartenstein. I wonder if he's playing more minutes. He wasn't a minutes restriction. His points are up 7.5, and he's still not playing the 35 minutes he was playing. So if we're only seeing 20 minutes out of him, I'd probably be quite hesitant to play him. His rebound prop, yeah, it's 6.5. I think it's where it should be, to be honest, based on the minutes that he's playing, which makes sense for Precious Achua then. So if Precious Achua's rebound line's at 6.5, and so is Isaiah Hartenstein, I guess Josh Hart gets a lot of reach too. You got to factor that in. But I think Precious Achua might be one to look at. I just have a feeling because he plays a lot more minutes. Well, he hasn't been lately, but blowout loss. That's a close game. Check the last 10. So his minutes are actually on the decline as well. So I'm not going to have a look into Precious Achua. I think for these Knicks guys, I wouldn't bet on any of the 3 that are currently available. I think you wait to see DiVincenzo, wait to see Josh Hart, Bogdanovic perhaps, Alec Burks. I think some of their role players could really overperform in this type of game. But heading over into these Orlando Magic players, let's check out Paolo Banchero. So in terms of the matchup, it's not a difficult one. He has gone over his points line in 4 straight, 6 of his last 10. Did score 36 points the last time these teams faced off. He's covered in 2 of his last 6. His assist prop is 5.5. Had 10 assists in his last game against Washington. 5 out of his last 10, but he's gone under in 6 consecutive games against the New York Knicks. His rebound prop, 6.5. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10. Does have a difficult matchup. He's gone over in 2 of his last 6. I wonder what his 3-point prop is. 1.5 plus money. Good matchup. 4 out of his last 10. Made 6 3-pointers the last time he played the Knicks. My Lord. So just checking the volume here. Over his last 10 games, he's averaging 4.3 attempts per game. That's obviously blown up by the 10 attempts he took the last time against New York. But for Banchero to make 2, there's some potential there at plus money. It's not the type of player I'd normally pick, to be honest, but why not? I told you I'm just running off vibe, right? If it feels good, let's not overthink it. So I'll take note of that. I'll have a quick look at it a little bit later and just check the pinned comments and you'll see whether I've taken the bet or not. Wendell Carter Jr. Points props at 10.5. He's covered in his last 2. Matchup with the Knicks is a difficult one, though. He has had some not sex. Well, he probably has, but he has had some success against the Knicks in the past, covering 4 of his last 5. But was playing a lot more minutes in these 3 games. The 2 games this season, playing less minutes, but has been somewhat effective. His rebound prop, 6.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10, 5 of his last 6, to be honest with you. So he's been rebounding quite well lately. A bit inconsistent when it comes to rebounding against the Knicks, though. So I wouldn't be surprised if he has a great game, but not enough. Basically, from what I've seen, it hasn't given me that feeling inside my body to say, take it. Jalen Suggs, points prop, 10.5, scored 19 against Washington last time. Difficult matchup here against the Knicks. He's covered in 1 of 3 games against New York. Only scored 4 points the last time these guys matched up. His 3-point props, 1.5. 6 out of his last 10. Made 5 3-pointers last game against Washington, but has a tough matchup here and covered in 1 of his last 3. Franz Wagner, he had a great game against Washington. So I remember looking at his numbers, right? This is how the Franz thing went. It's like, he's pretty inconsistent. He's been leaning to the under, if anything, in his last 10 games. Historical form against Washington, he's great. He's always scored well against them. A lot of you guys in the comments said that back Franz because he loves eating against Washington, and he absolutely did. So you guys were spot on. I didn't take that bet, but you guys were on the money. So 28 against Washington. Recent form, a bit all over the place. But last 2 games against the Knicks, he scored 32 and 21 points. The Knicks do give up some points to the small forward position. Pretty strong everywhere else. But against small forwards, they have found a little bit difficult. So let me know in the comment section, are you riding with Franz in this one? Because I'm unsure every time I look at his numbers. Looking at his assist prop, lines at 3.5, covered in 5 of his last 10, covered in 4 out of his last 5 against the Knicks. His rebound prop, 4.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10 games. Only 2 of 5 games against the New York Knicks. His 3-point prop is 1.5. It's plus money, just like Banchero, but he's only hit this in 2 out of his last 10 and in 1 of 5 against the Knicks. So points prop, probably be the one that I'd be leaning on the most, but I need your help. See if you can influence me. I'll put it down on my list, but I'm pretty unsure. But I'd hate to miss another Franz points prop when it's clear that he likes playing against this team. Yeah, outside of that, no one else to go through in this game. Let's jump into the next one. It's the Atlanta Hawks versus this game. Long list of outs for both teams. So most notably for Atlanta, Jalen Johnson is out now. For Memphis, Gigi Jackson's a game time decision, as well as Luke Kennard. I think Luke Kennard's most likely not going to play. Gigi Jackson, he's a chance. But both teams somewhat depleted. Could be difficult to bet on this. They could go deeper into their bench, get players you've never heard of. But let's check out DeJounte Murray. He's got a good matchup here against Memphis to score some points. His line is 23.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. That line's a little bit higher than you normally see it. He did score 26 points the last time he versed Memphis. Looking at his assist prop, it's 8.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Again, he's got a good matchup and had 4 assists last time against Memphis. I think it'd be great to look at how he's performed without Trae Young, though. So last 10 games without Trae, he's gone over this line in 6 of 10 games, yet to verse the Memphis Grizzlies without Trae Young. So 8.5 assists does seem a little bit steep. He does take a lot of shots, though. I'm a little bit butthurt because I bet on his PRA last time and he didn't deliver for me. So I'm not feeling it, but there could be a chance. Rebound-wise, got the best matchup basketball can provide. The Grizzlies allow the most rebounds to point guards on the season. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. He's gone under in 2 consecutive games against the Grizzlies, though. So matchup is there. 3-point prop. Line's at 2.5 for DeJounte. Memphis do give up some 3-pointers to point guards. 2 out of his last 10. Had 4 3-pointers the last time these guys met. So, yeah, I'm a little bit uncertain about that. Let's have a look at Clint Capella. 5 out of his last 10 games. Head-to-head matchups. Played quite well against the Grizzlies, scoring 18 and 20 points the last time these guys have played. But in those games, Capella was playing about 30 minutes a night. In his last 5, he's playing 23. So even though Okongwu is out, Clint Capella not seeing the same level of minutes. I think Bruno Fernando is playing quite a few minutes. So we're not feeling Clint too much. Oh, I forgot to look at his rebounds. Rebound line for Clint's 10.5. He's only covered in 3 of his last 10. Has a great matchup here, though, and has rebounded well against the Grizzlies in the past. But keeping in mind, line's at 10.5, but he's only playing 23 minutes a night. With these minutes, he's covered in 3 games, Utah, Golden State, and the Lakers. So I'd be a little bit hesitant. Saddiq Bey. I actually like watching Saddiq play. Plays very strong. Loves the contact. Rebounds well. Very simple player. Does have a good matchup here. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. Has gone under his last 2 games against Memphis, but Saddiq played 38 and 18 minutes in those games. In terms of his shot attempts, he was taking 11 shots per game. Over his last 5 games, that's increased to 12.6. So yeah, taking more shots slightly, but 17.5 seems a little bit steep. But he does get to the free throw line quite well, quite aggressive inside. Takes almost 6 3-point attempts per game. He's only shooting them at 25%, but the attempts are definitely there. No Jalen Johnson in this one, so I'm not sure how this is going to impact the way that the Hawks play. DeAndre Hunter gets more game time, but Jalen Johnson's been somewhat consistent all year in terms of playing, so it's hard to know how these teams are going to respond given the change to the lineup. So Saddiq Bey's rebound prop is at 7.5. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10. He does have a good matchup and hasn't done well against Memphis in the past. But what I'm thinking here is Saddiq Bey, I don't mind. Oh, well, firstly, the 7.5 rebounds is plus money. And Jalen Johnson is a very strong rebounder. He gets replaced by DeAndre Hunter. DeAndre Hunter, not the same level of rebounder, not even close, to be honest. DeAndre Hunter's lines aren't available right now, but I'm pretty confident he doesn't get too many. I'm just going to look that up. DeAndre Hunter stats. All right. DeAndre Hunter. So this season, DeAndre Hunter's averaging 3.8 rebounds per game, whereas Sadiq Bey, I think he'd be averaging close to 6, I'd say, just off the top of my head. Let's check it out. Yeah, so Sadiq Bey is averaging 6.5 rebounds per game this season. His line's at 7.5. So you really need 8. So 1.5 rebounds more than his average is what you'd be looking for. So in this particular game, the reason why I'm really considering it now, the matchup is good, and there is no Jalen Johnson. So Sadiq Bey, Clint Capella's obviously not going to get the type of minutes that we're used to. Yeah, I don't mind it. Sadiq Bey rebounds. So if you just look at the numbers, it's not compelling. But if you start to piece all these things together, it starts to make sense. But if he doesn't get his rebounds, then I look like a fucking idiot. So I'm willing to take that risk with you guys. I'm just getting this all out, all on the spot. I haven't put much thought into this, and I think I've performed better when I do it that way. Bogdanovic, he won them that last game against Cleveland. I remember watching. Does have a difficult matchup. He's covered in 3 of his last 10. He's gone under in both games against Memphis. His 3-point prop line's at 2.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. Difficult matchup shooting threes, and he's gone under both games against the Grizzlies. Looking at these Grizzlies, let's have a look at Jaren Jackson Jr. So he's covered his points prop in 6 out of his last 10 games. Head-to-head matchups, he's gone under in 3 straight against Atlanta. Does take a fair few 3-pointers, so I wanted to check that out. All right, he's hit 2 3-pointers in 9 of his last 10 games. But to get over 2, you're looking at minus 120 with the opportunity to push. If you take the 2.5, you get plus 140, but then he's only hit that in 4 of his last 10, so that's not great. Rebound-wise, line's at 6.5. He's surprisingly rebounded well in his last 2 games, but prior to that, absolutely awful. So I don't know what that's all about. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 2 out of his last 3. So, yeah, I'm not feeling Jaren Jackson Jr. Santi Aldama, 13.5. That's quite a high line with Jaren Jackson Jr. in the lineup, I think. So line's at 13.5. He's covered in 2 out of his last 10. He does have a good matchup, though, so you've got to keep that in mind. But if we look at his last 10 games with Jaren Jackson Jr. in the lineup, he's covered in 3 out of his last 10. So, yeah, his form hasn't been great, but the matchup is pretty good. I'm not saying to bet that, but that's tricky. Let's have a look at Vince Williams. We can normally find something bet on for Vince Williams. So his points prop, 14.5. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10 games. Does have a pretty good matchup here. Scored 5 points against Atlanta last time. Only took 6 shots. 6 shots, though. 14.5. I'm feeling bet in the under, but I know the matchup is good. But I've just 14.5 seems like a lot. Look at his games with Jaren Jackson Jr. 3 out of his last 10, he's gone over. So, yeah, I'd lean to the under on that. His assist line's at 5.5, though. This is one where I'd probably lean to the over. Matchup is pretty good. I'm not worried that he only had 1 assist last time against Atlanta. I'm playing a much different role now. He's been quite consistent getting his assist numbers up. Or we can just look at 5 assists of Vince Williams if we're looking at a parlay, perhaps. But I don't mind this. Good opportunity. There's bound to be some points in this. Memphis are terrible with the ball, but at the same time, Atlanta are terrible on the defensive end. So it could be something as simple as Sadiq Bey for 7 rebounds, perhaps, and then Vince Williams for 5 assists. I'm not too sure. I'll figure it out once I see the odds. Play with it. It's Williams assists. Now having a look at his rebound prop, 6.5. 4 out of his last 10 games. Matchup is somewhat difficult. He had 11 rebounds in this game against Atlanta, which is wild. I would feel confident taking his rebound prop, just looking at those numbers. But yeah, so for this game, I'm not feeling DeJounte Murray or Jaren Jackson Jr., which are star players. I'm thinking Sadiq Bey rebounds and Vince Williams assists, but I'll do some further research a bit later. Jumping to the next game, it's the Miami Heat versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. Let's pump the brakes for this one. Real quick announcement. Well, more of a tip, really. So I've been working on creating this video, a different video on how, I guess, to make more money sports betting. I haven't had the time to finish it off, but one of the key tips in that video was to use as many sports books as you can. And the reason why that's a great tip is because you get access to a lot more promotions, one. A lot of them have sign-ups, bonus bet, deposit matches, whatever you want to call it. They've all got different promotions, right? So if you sign up to heaps of different sports books, you get heaps of access to that. But then the other reason, probably the most important reason why you should sign up to as many sports books as you can, is to make sure that you're line shopping. A lot of the profit that I've earned is purely by picking players where I'm getting 10 to 15 cents more on the dollar for every single pick that I play. So I use a very large number of sports books, and I'd encourage you guys to do the same. You guys may have noticed in the video description from the last video that for those of you in the US, I do have a code. Sign up with BetUS. They've got your first 3 deposits, they'll match up to 125% in bonus bets. So I think it's a great offer to take advantage of, and also to use them to line shop if you're not using them already. So I don't think I'm going to get a chance to put that video together this weekend. So I thought I'd share that tip with you all, and just really a good reminder. But I do have plans for other videos. So do stay close to that one. Let's jump back into the preview. It's the Miami Heat versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. Let's go. All right, taking a look at the Miami Heat first. Tyler Hero, Kevin Love still out of this game. But we'll start with Terry Rozier. Had a very big game today against Dallas, though. So I was pretty impressed with the way that he played. So checking out his points prop firstly. He has covered in 6 out of his last 10 games, scored 27 points against the Dallas Mavericks today. Yet to play the OKC Thunder since joining the Miami Heat, but the matchup is not a bad one. It's not a great one, but it's not a bad one either. If you want to look at Terry's 3-point props, you're looking at about 2, but if you take the 1.5, very well under in terms of odds, minus 190. But if you take the over 2.5, it's plus 170. Now he's only hit 2 3-pointers made in 2 out of his last 10. He's just gone off in his last 2 games. He does have a great match when it comes to 3-point shooting. So if you're looking at his attempts, starting to lift 6 and 8 in his last 2 games. He is shooting 3-pointers at only 30%. So if you're looking to take because if I was going to take this, it would have to be the over 2.5. So if you're looking at over 2.5, he's shooting at about 30%. We're looking at least 9 attempts from downtown here from Terry Rozier. Given Tyler Hero's out, probably a good opportunity that he takes those, but it's a very small sample size, and I'd hate to risk my bankroll on just that information. Looking at his assists, though, the line's at 5.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10, 3 consecutive games now. The matchup is a somewhat difficult one. And looking at his rebound prop, that's at 3.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10 games, had 6 boards against Dallas, just a monster all over the place. And he does have a good matchup when it comes to getting rebounds against the OKC Thunder. I don't know if he's going to be the man to pick up. I don't think Duncan Robinson can either. So it'll be interesting to see who picks up SGA. But Terry Rozier has been getting done on the rebound front. Probably looking at a PRA because Terry's probably going to log some decent minutes here. He's only covered that in 3 of his last 10. I think that game against Dallas probably the outlier, to be honest. So I'm not going to be taking Terry Rozier with any confidence. Let's have a look at Duncan Robinson. So I did bet his over today. That cashed quite well, scored 19 points. I think we're looking at 14.5. The matchup against OKC is a good one, though. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10, which is pretty positive. Against OKC, he scored 3 points last time, played 24 minutes, shot 1 from 8. But if you're looking at his 3-point prop, you're looking at 3.5, and it's plus money. Had 5 3-pointers made against Dallas today. The OKC Thunder do give up a lot of 3-pointers to shooting guards. 1 3-pointer made in their last matchup. He made 4 in the game prior to that. So, yeah, Duncan Robinson, I'm going to put down on my short list here. I don't mind Duncan. Does he go back-to-back and cover these lines for us? His line has dropped. It is a slightly more difficult matchup, probably because he's also on a back-to-back. But I'll have a look at his points and 3-point prop and see where I land. What else are we looking at here? Adebayo up against Chet Holmgren. Could have a good rebounding game perhaps, but points-wise, his line's at 20.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. Does have a good matchup. Against OKC, scored 25 points last time, 15 points prior to that. His rebound prop is at 10.5, minus 108. Now, he's gone under in 7 consecutive games now. Does have an excellent matchup. The Thunder giving up the second most rebounds to centers. And in his last 2 games against OKC, he's had 13 and 11 rebounds. So, look, if Bam was rebounding a little bit better more recently, I'd take this in a heartbeat. He's got the great matchup up against OKC. I'd obviously lean to the over. I'm just bitching it, to be honest. Maybe I should stop being a bitch and should just take the bet. But Yeah, look, I'm a bit on the fence, but the feeling in my gut says no. But logically, I do think he goes over. But the feeling inside my gut is saying don't do it, so I probably won't. Assist prop 3.5, 5 out of his last 10. Good matchup here. I had 6 assists the last time he played OKC. 3 assists prior to that. Obviously, no Tyler Hero. I wonder how his assists look without Tyler in the lineup. And they're still inconsistent as hell. So, yeah. Bam, rebounds and assists. I think he does go over, but feeling in my gut tells me otherwise. Let's have a look at Jimmy Butler. So he didn't score the ball very well today. Only 14 points. Still played 37 minutes. 6 from 12. Didn't get to the line much, though. So he's a free throw merchant. Only took 2 attempts against Dallas. Up against OKC, difficult matchup. They give allow the least amount of points to small forwards on the season. In head-to-head matchups, he did score 35 points when they last matched up. Looking at his assist prop, that line's at 5.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. Difficult matchup, and against OKC, he had 4 assists last time. And taking a look at his rebound prop, that's also 5.5. 6 out of his last 10 games. Difficult matchup, had 7 rebounds last time against OKC. So, look, this might be the first time in a long time where I'm not too confident in taking a Jimmy prop. So, put you back on the shelf, Jimmy. We might pick you up a little bit later. Having a look at these OKC Thunder players. First one is SGA. His points line, only 30.5. Quite low for someone who hits 30.5 quite often. Difficult matchup here against Miami, but he has covered in 8 out of his last 10 games. Up against Miami, though, he's had 3 consecutive games going under 27, 26, and 28. His assist prop, 5.5, minus 160, though. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10, 2 out of his last 3 against the Heat. His rebound prop, also 5.5, covering in 5 of his last 10 games, and only 1 of 3 against Miami. So, look, out of those, I'd probably lean to the over in his points, but again, that feeling in my gut saying don't do it. But definitely the points prop. That's what I'm thinking. It's not what I'm feeling. Jalen Williams, points prop's 19.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10 games. Has got 3 consecutive games against the Miami Heat. I wonder if he takes many 3-pointers. He makes one every game. 6 out of his last 10 games, he's covered 2. The matchup with the Heat's not overly difficult, but he's covered in 1 of his last 3 against them. His assist props 4.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10, 2 out of his last 3. Had 12 assists the last time he played the Miami Heat. It was crazy. Rebound prop 4.5. Covered in 3 out of his last 10. Tough matchup, but had 9 rebounds when they last played. So, yeah, I'm not really feeling that one either. Let's have a look at Chet Holmgren. 15.5 points is his line. Difficult matchup here against Bam Adebayo. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, but he also scored 23 points when these teams last matched up. So he said, tell your matchup to get fucked because I'm going over, baby. His rebound prop, 8.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. Has been a lot more consistent rebounding the ball. In head-to-head matchups, he did have 9 rebounds in his last game against the Miami Heat, covering this line. If you're taking an alternate line at 7 rebounds, that's looking excellent. That's hit in 9 consecutive games. And obviously, he's hit that against Miami before. That could be a play. But Chet's assists, let's have a look at that. Difficult matchup. 4 out of his last 10. Only had 2 assists last time they played. So let's have a quick look at Josh Giddey, actually. Points-wise, lines at 10.5, 5 out of his last 10. Assist-wise, lines at 3.5, covering in 6 out of his last 10. And rebound-wise, that line's at 5.5, covering in 4 of his last 10. 3-pointers, his line's at 0.5. They do give up a few 3-pointers to shooting guards. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10, but you're looking at minus 190 odds. So for this particular game, what am I really leaning on here? Probably SGA overs and Chet Holmgren, points and rebounds, perhaps. Duncan Robinson, maybe. So there's a couple of players that I'll look into a little bit later. None of them jumping out to me, but we could play around with some lines to see if we can possibly get a same game parlay in this one. This looks like a great game. It's the Milwaukee Bucks versus the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, Giannis Antetokounmpo is a game-time decision, as well as LeBron James and Anthony Davis, of course. But so is Vanderbilt and Cam Reddish as well. The Lakers, they were disappointing in their last outing. Could there be a bounce back here? It's a pretty big game. We shall see. But diving into the player props, go through the LA ones because there's only LeBron, Rui, and AD. Starting with LeBron James. So his points line, 25.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, or 6 out of his last 7 games, really. And head-to-head matchups against the Bucks, he's enjoyed it. Scored 28 points in his last matchup against them. Looking at his 3-point prop, 1.5, minus 120 odds. The Bucks give him a difficult matchup, but up against the Bucks, got 3 3-pointers made last time. So LeBron's going to take his threes. Don't you worry about that. He's averaging 5 3-point attempts per game. He's shooting those at 50%. Obviously, it's blown out by the game that he had against the Clippers. But for him to get over 1.5, I don't mind that at all. Minus 119. So that could go into the parlay bucket where the odds aren't high, but high enough for me to bet on. Looking at his assist prop, he's been doing such a great job with this. 6 out of his last 10, but check that out. His lowest being 7. I think the line's probably just about right. Alternate lines will probably have a bit of confidence taking that. Head-to-head matchups, he had 11 assists last time against Giannis and the Bucks. His rebound prop is at 7.5. Now, this has been highly volatile. He's only hitting 2 out of his last 10, but had 8 rebounds last time he versed the Bucks. But LeBron last year and the year prior, he's always been a great rebounder. This year, clearly taking a step back in that regard. But points and assists for LeBron, 34.5. That's probably something that I could see. He's covered that in 7 out of his last 10, and the last time he faced Giannis and the Bucks, finished with 39. So 34.5 has been hitting quite well. He was disappointing against OKC, but the Lakers did get blown out in this one. And this game against the Bucks, I think the line's pretty much split. I think it's a pick'em, I believe. Let me quickly check my sportsbook right now. Yep. It's a pick'em. So Milwaukee by 0.5 point is the current line. So I don't think this game results in a blowout. So LeBron James should log a lot of minutes in this one. There's no players coming in that could potentially take some of his points or assists away. Look, if Giannis does not play, then there could be a blowout the other way. But from what I've seen, he's most likely to play. So I do like LeBron James points plus assists. Or there's another same game parlay that I'm looking at. You're getting it for like minus 105. And that's for LeBron James score 20 points to get 8 assists and make 1 3-pointer. I don't know. I'll see which one I decide to play, but definitely going to have a bet on LeBron James on this game. And Rui Hachimura, I just want to look at his points prop because he's been scoring quite well, like from the eye test, I guess. Maybe these games have swayed me. So he scored 29 against the Kings. Looks like every second game is a great one, but 6 out of his last 10 games he's covered his points line. Matchup is a difficult one. Only 8 points last time he versed the Bucks. So, yeah, I think Rui would be a great bet in the future, but I don't think in this game against Giannis. I don't think this is the one, but definitely someone I'll be looking at moving forward. Anthony Davis. His points prop is 23.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. Has a great matchup here against the Bucks. Covered in 1 of his last 2 games against them, though. So his form, inconsistent, not overly confident in taking him. I know he has a great matchup, but yeah, not feeling AD. His assist lines at 3.5, covering 3 of his last 10. Great matchup here as well, but again, covered against the Bucks, 1 of 2. And then his rebound prop, 13.5. It's been that high for quite some time. He's gone under in 3 consecutive games. Does have a good matchup here. Had 16 rebounds the last time he played the Milwaukee Bucks, but yeah, look, high lines and inconsistency. I'm not really feeling that. So probably LeBron, most likely to cover for the Los Angeles Lakers. Well, I have the most confidence in him covering for the Lakers. Jumping into the Milwaukee Bucks, I want to start with Dame first. So Dame's points prop is at 24.5. The matchup is not a difficult one, but Dame's only covered in 1 out of his last 10 games to verse the Lakers since he joined the Bucks. But looking at his 3-point prop, that's at 3.5. I think I took 3.5 when he played the Golden State Warriors. I might even take his 3-point prop here, 3.5 at plus money. I know he's only hit this in 4 out of his last 10, 4 out of his last 6, really. But if you check out the attempts, the volume is definitely there. So you needed to make 4 3-pointers. He's shooting them at 39%. So he needs to take about 10 3-pointers to cover this. 10 3-pointers in 2 of his last 3. So I don't mind that, especially at these odds. The Lakers obviously allow a lot of 3-pointers made. 2-point guards, so Dame 3-pointers. You're on my radar, my boy. Looking at his assist prop now, The 6.5 covering in 5 of his last 10. Matchup's not good or bad, so I wouldn't be too confident in taking that prop for Dame. Jumping into Malik Beasley, let's go straight to his 3-point prop. His one's at 2.5. He's covered in 6 of his last 10. The matchup is not hard, but it's not an easy one. His attempts, they have been there, but check out this shot percentage. That's 23. In his last 3 games, he's taken 23 pointers, and he's made 2 of them. So that's a 10% hit rate for Malik Beasley at the moment. So I'm not willing to take his 3-point prop. Who else do we have? Let's have a look at Brook Lopez here. Quite achiever, old Brook. Lines at 10.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. Matchup, it's mid to hard, but in 1 of 2 against the Lakers. So we're not feeling that. What about his 3-point prop? 1.5. 5 out of his last 10. Great matchup here. The Lakers allow the most 3-pointers made to centers in the league. He's covered in 1 of 2 games. He's averaging 4 attempts in those games. Over his last 10, he's averaging 5.9 3-point attempts. So for him to make 2, possibly, but we don't know if he's going to take those shots. He has these games where he chucks up heaps, but there are also a lot of games where he doesn't take many at all. So, yeah, Brook Lopez for 3-pointers. I'd be a little bit hesitant. Bobby Portis, I know he's been playing quite well lately. So he's covered his points line in 6 out of his last 10 games, 28 and 20 in his last 2. Up against the Lakers, he scored 15 points the last time he played them. That's not too convincing. 3 rebound prop, 7.5, 5 out of his last 10. Had 10 rebounds last time against the Lakers, but that was almost 2 years ago. And then his 3-point prop, 5 out of his last 10. Lakers do without a lot of 3-pointers to power forwards, but look, Bobby Portis, at the number of attempts he's averaging, he'll have to shoot a very high percentage in order to cover that. So that makes me a little bit hesitant. And let's have a look at Giannis Antetokounmpo. And his last 10, his line's at 30.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. And he's covered at the last 2 games against the Lakers, scoring 40 and 38 points. His assist prop, 6.5. He's only covered in 3 of his last 10. The matchup is a good one, though, and he's gone under in his last 2 games against the Lakers. His rebound prop, 5 out of the last 10 games, and he's gone under the last 2 games against the Lakers. So he does have Dame now, capable of some massive rebounding efforts, but I think if you're just looking at numbers, rebounds and assists don't look too bad. If you're looking at the under, though. So he's gone under in 6 of his last 10. He went under in his last 2 games against the Lakers. He does have Dame now as well, which means he can probably put more effort on this side. But, yeah, again, the game the gods aren't speaking to me on that one. So for that particular game, Dame 3-pointers and probably LeBron. Those are some things that I'll be looking at. And the very last one is the Houston Rockets versus the Portland Trailblazers. Jeremy Grant, Kamara, Jabari Walker, DeAndre Ayton, Scoot Henderson, all game time decisions for Portland. I mean, not Portland. Yeah, for Portland. So, and Jeff Green for Houston's a game time decision as well. So let's have a look into these Portland Trailblazers, though. See if we can find anything juicy. So Anthony Simons, he's had 3 very strong games. 30, 34, and 29 points. The matchup with Houston is somewhat difficult, but Anthony Simons has covered in 3 consecutive games against the Houston Rockets, including 1 game earlier this season with 33 points. So Anthony Simons could be a good play. Looking at his 3-point props, it's at 3.5. He's covered that in 3 straight, 6 out of his last 10 games, and he's nailed it every time against the Houston Rockets. So I don't like betting on Anthony Simons, but that doesn't look too bad. In terms of his assists, line's at 6.5, 4 out of his last 10, 1 of his last 3 against Houston. So I don't like this. Wildly inconsistent, I must say. Who else have we got? Jeremy Grant. I've caught myself betting on this guy quite a few times, and I feel like I've lost every single time. So his points prop, for 20.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. Difficult matchup for small forwards. Head-to-head matchups against the Rockets. He covered in their last matchup, scoring 21 points. There's a lot of points scored in that game, though. And he went under the 2 games prior to that. His 3-point prop is at 1.5. He's covered in 2 or 3 against the Rockets. But he's covered in 8 of his last 10 games. That's pretty wild. I'm still not going to bet that, but that's pretty good. His assist prop line's at 3.5 plus money, and he's covered this in 8 of his last 10. Difficult matchup, though. But he has been doing quite well, getting some assists. And his rebound prop, I knew that this was going to look like this. It's all over the place. So no confidence in taking that. But it was interesting to see his 3-pointers and his assist form. It's actually been going quite well. Fred VanVleet, his points prop is 16.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10 games. The matchup against Portland's not difficult, not easy either. He scored 18 points the last time they played, but I think a lot of players would have gone over in this game. 137 or 131. What else have we got? His 3-point prop for Fred is 2.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. Difficult matchup here against Portland. Hit only 3 the last time they played. His assist line, 7.5. He does have a good matchup. He's covered in 3 straight games. Only had 7 assists against Portland last time. And his rebound prop, 3.5. He's covered in 4 straight, 5 out of his last 10. And against the Blazers last time, he had 6 rebounds. So, look, for this game and Fred, rebounds and assists, somewhat appealing, but he's only covered that in 3 straight games. The matchup is a good one, and he did cover this in the last game against Portland. But, yeah, over his last 20, he's hit in 9 of his last 20 games. He went through this poor stretch here, but his last 3 have been great, but they're also trending downwards, and I don't like that. Jalen Green, inconsistent as hell, very talented. His points prop, 18.5. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10. He's on the downward trend. Does have a good matchup here against Portland, though. Allow a lot of points to shooting guards. He scored 29 points when they last matched up. But again, that game, everybody went over. Went under in the 2 games prior to that. So, just having a look at his minutes, almost, they're somewhat consistent, but his shot attempts, capable of going 20 plus, but only took 14 shots against the Clippers. I just don't know if he's going to get the volume in this one. 3-point prop is at 2.5. Difficult matchup and inconsistent as hell. Assists, 3.5 plus money, but inconsistent as hell, but does have a good matchup. Jalen Green, not really feeling that. Who else is there? Jabari Smith. I think he's on a downward trend, I believe, at the moment when it comes to rebounding. Points-wise, yeah, 6 out of his last 10. The matchup's not bad. He went under in 3 consecutive games against Portland, though. His rebound prop is at 8.5. Had this monstrous stretch of getting boards. Last 3 games, in 3 games, he's had 10 rebounds. So that's quite interesting. He's got under in 3 straight games. So, yeah, if I was going to bet Jabari Smith, probably under. But, yeah, that's not speaking to me. Alperen Sengun. Now, he had a massive game against the Clippers. Absolutely massive. Huge triple-double. Let's take a look at it. So he's got a good matchup here against Portland. Score some points. Line's at 22.5. He's covered in 3 of his last 10 games. That doesn't mean he's been playing bad. His line would have been a lot lower for these games. But in head-to-head matchups, he scored 30 points the last time these teams matched up. Went under in the 3 games prior. His assist props at 4.5. Had 14 assists against the Clippers. Covered in 4 of his last 10. Had 5 and 8 assists in his last 2 games. Against Portland, that's at plus money too. That's not too bad. And then his rebound props at 11.5. 19 rebounds against the Clippers. 4 out of his last 10. Has gone under in 4 consecutive games against Portland, though. So I'm thinking maybe points plus assists in this game. I think the assist play alone is good value. But the points prop, probably a bigger ceiling to go over. Again, he's only covered in 3 of his last 10. His last 2 games have been very strong. The matchup is good. And when they matched up earlier this season, 30 points and 8 assists from Alperen Sengun. So, yeah, just a little bit of a lean because based off what we've seen, Fred, we're not confident that he has a big game. Jalen Green, he's trending downwards. Jabari Smith, inconsistent as hell. Dylan Brooks, his points line seems to be dropping day by day. 9.5 now. He has covered in 5 of his last 10. He has a difficult matchup, but he scored 14 points against Portland last time. So, yeah, Alperen Sengun after the big game against the Clippers, that might be something that he's keen to replicate. Hopefully that draw is still there, but I'll check that out before I wrap everything up. Look, I apologize if the video is a bit, stop and start-ish. I was actually trying to record this, and then I'd stop recording and then watch some football. And then when there was a break, I'd go back, record. Like it was very stop-start in this one. So if it seems a bit off, it might be. But what I'm telling you isn't off is the way that I feel. So following the same strategy that we followed yesterday, absolutely murdered it. Over 11 units profit. Congrats to anyone who tailed. But pretty much if I see a bet that I like, I'll do some quick research, a little bit of a dive and get straight into it. I'm not going to overanalyze it because that hurt my feelings the other day. So we're just going to ride the vibe, baby. Type in vibe in the comments if you made it this far. You guys, in the next one, you know how I do it. Every single day, baby, we hit a preview, give you all the information you need. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.
Sub to the channel cause your boy's getting busy. Coming to you live from the west side of Sydney. We've got the free picks and the juice and the daily. It's all free, you don't even have to pay me.